Freedom is a word that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Some see it as the ultimate liberating force. Some see it as a necessary concept in a world full of things that seek to subdue and subjugate. And some see it as an excuse to avoid responsibility for one's friends, family, or society. Personally, I see freedom as one of the most fundamental and crucial ideals in the world. But when I look at others who feel the same, I am disheartened by their lack of insight. Freedom is good and just, yes, but only to a point. I'm getting ahead of myself, however. I have some points to make, but I feel like they'd be better illustrated by an example many of you are familiar with. Rick and Morty is an adult cartoon show that took the world by storm years ago. The series follows the misadventures of cynical mad scientist Rick Sanchez and his good-hearted but fretful grandson Morty Smith, who split their time between domestic life and interdimensional adventures that take place across an infinite number of realities, often traveling to other planets and dimensions through portals and on Rick's flying saucer. The general concept of Rick and Morty relies on two conflicting scenarios: domestic family drama and an alcoholic grandfather dragging his grandson into hijinks. If you've watched the more recent seasons, you'll begin to realize something about Rick specifically. You'll begin to notice that while Rick is probably the most free man in the universe, he's also the loneliest and most constricted. You begin to realize that while Rick has the ultimate freedom, he's still completely unhappy. I believe this is due to a fundamental lack of understanding that Rick has about freedom. But before we jump in, remember to please hit the like button. Engagement is the main metric YouTube uses to push out my videos to new people. And short of leaving a comment, the like button is the next best thing to tell YouTube that it should show this video to more people. It's easy, it's free, and you'll be doing a massive service to this channel and community. If you really like the channel, then consider subscribing as well so that you don't miss follow-up videos when they go live. Rick Sanchez is, according to many within the show, the smartest man in the universe. His unmatched intelligence has allowed him to take complete control of the laws of nature and bend them to his will. Whether it's to create a fully child-friendly alternate universe for his young daughter to play in, creating clones in order to escape death, or just the ability to turn himself into a pickle that destroyed a Russian mafia hideout, Rick, through his unmatched intelligence, has created himself a world of unparalleled freedom. He does whatever he wants, whenever he wants. His family can't stop him. His own clones can't stop him. Heck, an entire galactic empire couldn't stop him. Rick Sanchez is, for all intents and purposes, a shining paragon of ultimate freedom. And yet, he's miserable. Despite all the freedom, all the inventions, and despite his god-tier intellect, he is utterly miserable. Rick spends most of his time in a drunken stupor or in search of some kind of hedonistic pleasure purely in the attempt to overcome the gnawing feeling of despair in the pit of his stomach. Despite all the freedom and intelligence, Rick is ultimately trapped by a monster of his own making. But why? Why is he so miserable? Why has freedom, an ideal I hold in the highest regard, led to Rick's ultimate downfall? Why is he so sad and depressed when he could literally have anything he wanted in the world? I postulate that Rick's unhappiness and ultimate entrapment by depression is due to one major mistake he makes. You see, Rick looks at the universe and feels that he is the master of all. He feels he has ultimate freedom and nothing stands in his way. He has the world in the palm of his hand and can do whatever he wants. And that's exactly his mistake. He can do whatever he wants. Rick assumes that freedom and intellect are the ultimate determinants of happiness and fulfillment. Rick assumes that by having the ability to do whatever he wants, he would end up living a good and happy life. But that's not how freedom works. Freedom is a coin and is only looking at one side of it. There's another side to the coin that balances it out. Similar to a pair of weighing scales, freedom is on one side, and if you only focus on it, you'll put everything out of balance. Rick's big mistake is ignoring the other side of that coin, and that side is called responsibility. I truly believe that freedom is the ultimate ideal. Think about it. Nothing good in life is attainable without the freedom to do so. From a stable financial situation to emotional and mental stability, nothing is possible without freedom. For example, I follow Stoicism as my philosophy of life for many reasons, but one of the major reasons is mental and emotional freedom. Or rather, Stoicism provides me freedom from anxiety and emotional strain because it allows me to control my mind and overcome emotions and thoughts that would chain me down. Stoicism has provided me with mental freedom unlike anything else, and this is one of the major reasons why I follow it. As another example, I've also begun eating a healthier diet and exercising every single morning. I do this for many reasons, but one of the major reasons is to be free from the ailments and diseases that ravage our populations. I don't want to feel held back or limited by my body, and thus I actively work on being healthier and stronger. I could go on and on about how I value freedom as one of the highest ideals. I haven't even gone into my thoughts on governments yet, but that would take the whole video on its own. And don't even get me started on financial freedom, because I just go on the whole Bitcoin versus fiat tirade again. The point I'm trying to make, however, is that I highly value freedom. Without the freedom to do so, humanity would still be squatting in caves and hoping to survive the next winter. But as I said earlier, freedom is only one side of the coin. You can seek freedom only and ignore the other side, but you do so at your own peril. The other side, as I've mentioned, is responsibility. Responsibility is what tempers freedom. A young teenage girl might wish she could have the freedom to sleep around as she wishes, but her responsibility to avoid disease, pregnancy, and social backlash is what tempers her animalistic impulses. A young guy might wish he had the freedom to just play video games all day and achieve nothing of meaning, but his responsibility to himself and his family is what gets him to work. A parent might wish they had the freedom to go out and party like they did in their youth, but their responsibility to their child's flourishing is what keeps them in line. I wish I could have the freedom to relax and smoke weed all day, but the responsibility I have to myself and my family requires that I get off my ass and focus on building a better life. Unfettered freedom, without responsibility to rein it in, poses a great risk to a lot of people's well-being. No matter how hard you try, you cannot uncouple freedom from responsibility. Freedom is what allows civilizations the ability to grow, expand, and flourish. Responsibility is what keeps civilizations together and prevents the expansion from ripping it apart. Remember that we're a social species. We're evolved to seek the betterment of our tribe. So if we ignore responsibility, we'll feel it. Look at Rick and how utterly miserable he is. He may be a super genius, but he's still human. And by shirking his responsibility as a father and grandfather, he finds himself more and more isolated and more unhappy. You must, if you seek to be happy, find a balance between freedom and responsibility. Freedom is great and responsibility is vitally important, but you must strike a balance between the two. Too much freedom and you end up sad and unfulfilled. Too much responsibility and you end up crushed and constricted by your obligations. So, how do we strike that balance? Well, like most answers in life, it depends. When it comes to something like, for example, casual sex, I would urge more responsibility in that case. Sure, you can go ahead and get it out of your system, but what happens if you end up becoming a parent before you're even able to take care of yourself? Or in the case of drug usage, you're welcome to do what you want with your own body, of course, but you still have a responsibility to those who live with you and to keep a roof over your own head. If your drug usage negatively affects the lives of other people, then you're completely shirking your responsibility. But it's easy to make these abstract examples and speak from that level. How about something more tangible, more real? Let's take an example that had the whole world on edge. An example that is bound to cause a lot of anger in the comments and likely a few people to unsubscribe. Lockdowns. Many people said that lockdowns were draconian and an example of the government overstepping its authority and curtailing the freedom of the people. Others said that lockdowns were necessary and that people had a social responsibility to avoid infecting other people. Freedom on one side and responsibility on the other. How do you strike a balance in this case? The ultimate answer is to allow open discussion and debate, and then to allow people to make the best decision for themselves. Basically, allow people to look at all the available data and make a call based on their best estimates. If you want to lock yourself in your house and avoid people, you're welcome to do so. If you want to go out and interact with others, you're welcome to do so. You see, it's a fact of life that you will get sick at some point. Trying to avoid a virus is an exercise in futility. Unless you live in a highly secure biolab, there's no way to avoid a virus getting to you. These things are evolved to find a host and multiply, and we humans have yet to invent a way to eliminate the threat of germs from our daily lives. So yes, the vulnerable and those with comorbidities had to do whatever they could in order to avoid putting themselves at risk. But those people without these factors, those who are healthy, fit, and young, should have the freedom to go out and live their lives. In considering the lockdown question, and whether responsibility should trump freedom in this case, you need to ask one crucial question. How many people will die from the lockdowns and their after effects? How much damage will be done by lockdowns versus having no lockdowns? You need to do a cost-benefit analysis. We know that there is now a multi-year-long waiting list for cancer screening and treatments due to the lockdowns. How many lives will that cost in the long run? We know that young children missed out on years of crucial schooling and social interaction. How many young lives will that disrupt in the long run? We know that telling people to stay home and not go to the gym will result in a spike in the obesity rates. How many lives will that affect? How many lives will be affected or even ended because of the economic turmoil created by shutting down the economy? Are we willing to sacrifice the well-being of the young and healthy in order to preserve the safety of the old and unhealthy? All of these questions and more needed to be asked and debated before a population can collectively consent to having lockdowns imposed on them. Unfortunately, none of this was allowed. Dissent was silenced and questions were censored. The result is our current situation. I use the lockdown example to illustrate a point. Before you make a decision that hinges on the balance between freedom and responsibility, you must think it through. Question it, consider the implications, ruminate on the consequences of one decision over the other, and make sure that whatever option you choose, you're willing to live with the consequences. More than that, be sure you're willing to let others live with the consequences of your actions, because as I said earlier, we're a social species. It's inevitable that your choices will affect your loved ones, so make sure you take them into consideration as well. There is no one-size-fits-all approach to the freedom versus responsibility question. It depends on the situation and the cost-benefit analysis you do. But remember that you cannot uncouple freedom from responsibility. You need to be responsible in your quest for freedom, and you must be free to seek out and fulfill your responsibilities. But before you act, make sure you've thought the matter through. Rick Sanchez is an example of a man who went all in on freedom to his own detriment. As much as I love freedom, I know that it has its limits. Stoicism teaches that one should have temperance or self-control in all aspects of life. This applies as much to freedom as it does to something like alcohol. Rick actively harms and shuns the family around him because he has no sense of the responsibility he has towards them. He lives a sad, depressed life, fueled by alcohol, drugs, and the search for hedonistic pleasure. All because he refuses to acknowledge the fact that he must control himself and fulfill his responsibility to himself and his loved ones. The freedom he has seems fun, yes. It seems intriguing and alluring for sure. But I'd turn it down every time if I had to be miserable for the rest of my life. So know that whenever I advocate for freedom, or whenever I hold freedom as the highest ideal, I never do so in absence of responsibility. They are linked, and you ignore that link to your own detriment. By all means, seek freedom, but do not do so without considering your responsibility. Thank you very much for watching. Please consider liking the video, since that's the most impactful metric YouTube uses to gauge us whether or not to recommend the video. And if you'd like to see more, consider hitting that subscribe button. Anyway, thank you for your time, take care, and we'll talk again very soon.